Great, well I think we'll get started. Thank you for coming out on this horrific weather day. Today we have Dr. Ralph Smith from the biology department who's going to talk to us about some of the activities he does with his classes using quizzes and surveys as polling questions. And we were going to have Stephen Svensson from St. Jerome's talking to us about his use of discussions, but the daycare is closed and he has no one to take care of his kid. So he won't be joining us this time, but I think we're going to twist his arm to come in December when we do the next user group session. So I'm sorry about that for people who are looking forward to that discussion. I see some sad faces. Anyway, hopefully Stephen is listening to us because we are doing a simultaneous webcast of the session as well. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if some people have decided they'd rather stay at their desks than come today. And if people out there would like to ask questions, Mary Power is going to be monitoring her email to take questions. And so her email address is m2power@uwaterloo.ca. So if you have questions for Ralph, I think you'd be taking questions at the end from people out in webcast land. But people who are here, I'm sure Ralph would entertain questions during his presentation. So with no further ado, let's get started.
Okay, well, thanks for coming. I'll just be talking about a few little things I do in Biology 351, things that I actually picked up, I think, at one of these sessions some years ago. And I think it's been pretty helpful, but I'm hoping for some ideas on how it could be better as well. 351 is an upper level course that typically gets around 90 students these days. And it's been using Learn and before that ACE for quite a long time. So I always direct the students to have a good look through the course website at the beginning of the class. And organizing the website is something that I'm not very good at and feel could be a lot better. Although I don't do anything terribly sophisticated, it still gets fairly complicated in a hurry. And I actually admire how clever our students are in working out the idiosyncrasies of how we organize our different course websites. Makes the first couple of weeks of term interesting for everybody, but we get through it. So if you go to the front page of the course, you see it's pretty boring. I've done very little customization here at all. But of course, there's still lots there because it's Learn. And if we go to the content, you'll see one of the realities of this course, which is talk, 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 talk. Lots of lectures. It's nominally 3 lectures a week, and it usually is 3 lectures a week. There's no lab section, even though it'd be lovely to have one. And this is the mixture of assessment tools that I use in the course. That thing called IT assignment is just a little exercise I have them do to get them to learn about some search engines and document retrieval tools that they will need to know in order to do their essay assignment, which involves them scouring the recent scientific literature to address some arbitrary question I've assigned. So that's done online as well with a small value added to it. We should advance. Please advance. Thank you. So, if any of you have done courses that involve a lot of lectures, you know the problem. How do you make it a little livelier? How do you get some action going in the classroom? And once you're up around 90 students, I think it becomes really challenging because anything you think of in terms of groups is still pretty unwieldy. And unless each group has 30 seconds each, you're not going to get much done. So one of the things I do along the way is to assign them a number of readings, 4, that are on topics related to the lecture material, but are also topical and hopefully fairly recent advances in that area of knowledge. And this is part of my endeavor just to enliven what they're seeing, make it relevant, and encourage them to become more competent in understanding scientific literature. It's a big hill to climb when you're an undergraduate. The language is very technical, a lot of methods and materials that you don't know about. So I think it's important to do that, but it also gives us something hopefully interesting to talk about. And there's the problem, how do you get a class of 90 people talking about something? So one of the things I do is to give them a reward for at least reading the article before they come to the classroom session where we're going to talk about it. And so there's a little online quiz that they do with a small but not trivial value associated with it. So for example, the first special topic this year linked into a part of the course in which we had just covered some of the basics of surface water chemistry. And they did in fact already know about this thing called acid-base ion balance, why precipitation is acidic, why surface waters can become acidic. So they have some scientific grounding in it. And then this is the special topics day. This is a very short lecture in which I just quickly remind them of what they should know, and then say a few words about some of the background relevant to the article they read. So in this case, we talk about the history of action on the acid precipitation problem, and I introduced the thing that I really want them to get a handle on from this session is something called the critical load concept, which you don't need to know about, but they sure do, because they'll be tested on it. And the article is one that is really fun. They coined this lovely term, aquatic osteoporosis, and the authors are arguing that we have a legacy effect from acid precipitation, which is starving many of our lakes of calcium and having a lot of biological consequences. This is the article they're asked to read. It's from Science, which is one of the lead journals in science, very broad. And so it's nice if you can use these articles because they're meant to be accessible to a broad audience, and they're short. They're only about 3 pages. And this one has a bonus. The first author is an alumnus of this university, did his master's in the biology department, so I have a chance to tell them, you too can be a high impact researcher and publish in the best journals. Adam did it, you can do it. So it really is an interesting paper, but how interesting as it is, how do we get discussion going on it? And that's where I picked up a good hint from this group some years ago, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. To do the quiz, the students have to go to the quizzes. And they, of course, won't see this. This is the instructor view that lists all of the assignments that are classified as quizzes. And that's the first quiz they have to do. But in fact, they wouldn't even see that quiz if they tried to do it. It's open for a window of time, about 10 days leading up to the day of the class, and then it closes. Because it's no use to me if you read it after the class. You have to do it before. But you don't even get to do it before until you do something else. And that is, you have to take a survey. And the surveys are polling questions which are not technical. They're the sort of thing that a CBC reporter might ask the man or woman in the street. So again, we're seeing the instructor view here, but there's polling question 1. And just like the quizzes, this is only accessible for a window of time leading up to the class meeting. So if we look at what polling question 1 is like, we're in preview mode here, but it's very simple. This one says, if Canada cannot obtain cooperation from the USA on transboundary pollution issues, should access of the USA to our oil and gas resources be used for leverage? So you could maybe imagine how some of our parties in Ottawa might take different stands on this. It's a political question, but it's also tied to the science topic because acidification is a problem of long-range transport of atmospheric pollutants. It's a transboundary issue. And of course, it was addressed with a binational agreement that Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney signed back in the 1980s, one of the most successful international pollution control measures we've ever adopted. I like to remind my students of that because in the pollution business, we've got to be very grateful actually for the relationship we have with the USA. We've done some good things with them. But anyway, this is the question. So it's an opinion question. You can answer either way you like. And I'm just curious if we could take a quick straw poll here on how people would feel about that. Who would be in favor of playing hardball and saying, well, forget that Excel pipeline, and in fact, forget the other pipelines too. You can get your oil somewhere else. Anybody think that's a good idea? One? I think it might be worth trying. I'd say we've got 2, 4, hands up again. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Who thinks that's not a good idea? 1. So we've got a pretty strong majority in favor of the resolution. Okay. I'll let you know how the students voted later. And this is one of the things I try to do with the polling question. I'm hoping that they're going to be curious to know what the vote was, because they don't know until I tell them. And so I try to keep that as a little teaser during the class to keep people at least interested in hearing what the answer was on that. So then they're allowed to go and do the quiz. And when they start the quiz, they'll be confronted with questions like these. And the idea with these questions is that they're easy if you've made any effort to look at the article. It's just a reward for at least looking at it. I usually have one question that's a little harder, that requires a little more care in the reading, but mostly it's meant to be easy. And in general, they do quite well on these quizzes. So here's this year's statistics on polling question 1. And you can see very high average on this. That's not including students who failed to complete it, and there always are some, always. And one problem I did encounter this year was that people were confused at first about where to go to find the survey. I got a lot of panicky last-minute emails about, I can't find the quiz, I can't find the quiz. Well, I told you, you have to do the polling question. Well, where's the polling question? It's under surveys. Oh. So I've got a bit of work to do in helping them get a grip on this better next year. But I will say that one thing I loved about Learn coming in was it encouraged me to automate these quizzes, which proved to be delightfully easy to do in Learn, and saves me significant time. On the other hand, if you make any mistakes in setting it up, you end up manually regrading the quiz anyway. So you really want to get it right the first time, or you've wasted your effort. So these are the sorts of sciencey questions that I'm hoping we'll get some discussion on during that session. Deals with the substance of the article, which has this beautiful, colorful figure in it. And so these are the meaty things that I hope we'll talk about. What should managers do? In the course, I always try to bring the material back occasionally to things with societal relevance. So getting people to express opinions and questions about the content of the article and these considerations is the goal. You're probably curious to know how they voted. And you're a lot more radical than our students. That's what on my polling questions, I usually don't get a terribly lopsided result. I usually get between 55 and 75% on one side. But that leaves a nice, large group of people on the opposing side. And that's the great thing that I picked up from the earlier meeting here. The idea that you can use polls like these, you can present the results to the class, and then if you want to get people to talk about their opinion, you can console the minority vote and say, you may be a minority, but you're a minority of 20 or 30 people. You're not a lone oddball. So there must be a good reason that you voted the way you did, and that helps get discussion going. And I've had some great discussions on the polling questions because lots of our students have work experience or other experience that gives them a special view of things. They may have worked in a government lab that was involved in regulations around this topic. They may have family property that fronts on a lake somewhere that's been affected. And so I get lots of interesting discussion going quite often on the polling question. All the same, there's always room for improvement. And one thing I really need to do is to just make it a little easier for the students when the first time through. On the positive side, this does sometimes, I think, help break the ice and get discussion going on the actual article that I was hoping we would talk about. Sometimes I leave the polling question entirely to the end as a kind of treat. Sometimes if the discussion's not starting up very well, I go to it sooner in an effort just to get people talking and then come back to the topic article. It's been nice that I've had students say that they like this. They like having the special topics readings. They like seeing the relevance. They like a chance to see what actual published work on that kind of topic looks like, and they enjoy the discussion aspect of it. And you know, I tend to hear that, especially from students that I've come to know a bit better, students who may be doing honors projects in my lab or a colleague's lab, and I get to know them better. But of course, those are often the more engaged students. So I'm not sure if my feedback is a little lopsided, but I've had good comments on the course evaluations too. So I don't think they hate this. I include the topics articles on tests, not heavily, but enough to get an idea that they are retaining something from the articles. And it wasn't technically hard for me to set this up, except, as I say, setting up the multiple choice questions. If you get your grading wrong, then you've got a lot of work to do. Otherwise, it's pretty easy. It is a strain to keep coming up with good special topics articles that are current enough, but still fit well with the lecture material. And the one I just showed you is getting a little long in the tooth, and soon I'm going to have to change it, because for students today, 2008 feels like a long time ago. And it may be a very relevant article, but you like them to seem recent. So on the negative side, I still struggle to stop myself from talking. Leave enough time for the discussion that I'm hoping we're going to get. So sometimes the discussion could keep going, but time is up, and I wish I had more. An option is to use some kind of online discussion forum. I'm a little wary of doing that because I've never tried it, and I'm not sure what kind of time commitment that might impose on me. So I'm a lazy professor. I don't want to sign up for an extra 6 hours a week of bulletin board or other activity. And you know, it doesn't always work. Some days it's a struggle to get much going. And I'm not sure why. I've put a few ideas in there. It takes a lot of energy on the part of the presenter, of the leader, to make this stuff work. And I think just some days you're better than you are other days, but there may be something systematic I could do. And then in a class of 90, I typically get maybe high 70s or 80 actually in the classroom. There's always 10 or so missing, at least. But still, I've got 80 students in there. The majority of them don't say anything. And you wonder, what are they really getting from this? Then again, if they all had something to say, it would be chaos. So I should probably be grateful. But I don't know. So ideas on how this could be better are much welcomed. But I have found a nice little trick, and I do find the polling questions are a nice way to at least have a bit of repartee with the class in a non-threatening, low-pressure kind of context, which I think we all find enjoyable. So I think that pretty much concludes what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Do we have any questions? I'm just going to pass people the mic so that our people out in webcast land can hear.
So my question regards how you actually conduct the discussion. Is it you talking to the class with individuals putting their hands up, or do you break the class into discussion groups?
I do not use discussion groups, which sounds like a really great idea, Susan. But I don't. It's a committee of the whole.
Yeah, because I actually attended another professor's lecture, and what she did was, in fact, have them form little microsatellite groups, and then one person would be the spokesperson for that group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. It's a lot of groups. What would you do? Would you have 10 groups of 9 or? Yeah. I love that idea. I'm just unsure of the time management. Just the reporting out would.
Well, what this professor did was she said, okay, you have 40 seconds or you have 1 minute. And so she would actually time it.
Right.
Yeah. And that way really cut them off.
I don't think you would necessarily need to ask everybody to report back. You could just get, some representative reporting back.
Well, that's true.
Potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Great. I will hand over to Kelly.
So when you're grading the quizzes, do you, and you may have mentioned this, but do you have them get their immediate feedback, or do you wait to find out until they're in class whether they got a question right or wrong?
They don't get feedback on the quiz until after the class, because I don't want somebody finding out that they got all 5 questions right and then sharing that with everybody else.
Yeah, that's my concern. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I like your idea of using the opinion polls. Is there a key source that you go to find that information?
Well, it's an aquatic ecology course, and so environmental issues are always part of it. And it's really not that difficult to think of pertinent questions that have societal or political dimensions to them. You just read the newspaper, and there's a ready
so
supply.
Just generally looking at different newspapers and finding results there that then you can bring in.
Well, and yeah, I mean, even in my field of research, people are always considering the societal and policy angles of things. We have to do that to justify our funding. So
Sure.
we've always got lots of questions in mind that would be appropriate.
Oh, I can think of questions that I could use in the class, but I'm just wondering of sources of polls that have already been done. So.
No, I haven't resorted to that.
Okay. But you said that you were, at the end of the class, that you were revealing the public, like results of previous polls that have been done amongst the Canadian public or something?
Actually, that would be so interesting.
No.
But no, I only tell the class how they voted.
Oh, so they voted online. You're revealing what the rest of the class has done. Okay, good.
Right.
Sorry.
And regrettably, I have not kept track of the answers over the years, even though I sense that they shift a bit. And I have another question about, should we have more hydroelectric dams or more nuclear generating stations, given that we have to have one or the other? And I feel the responses on that really shifted after Fukushima. And nuclears are very unpopular now.
Have you ever set up polls after a topic had been covered to see what the opinion of the class is, after they've become better acquainted with the material?
I have been thinking about doing that, and I've almost been thinking about doing it right at the end of the course, because in some cases we learn more about something that would have influenced their answer on a previous poll. And so I think that could be a fun thing to do.
So I have a question. It was interesting. We did the poll here, and we had to put our hands up, and everybody's kind of looking around the room, what's the vote? What do you think, what is the effect of the anonymity on the vote? Have you ever had any feedback about whether that's important, that they feel they're doing that and not having to identify? Because when they're talking about the topic in class, they are revealing what their stance was. So
Yes.
There's kind of a switch of gears there within the activity.
Well, I find it hard to get the first couple of people to explain their voting reasons. I have to bully them a bit. And, but I keep reminding them that there are lots of people on both sides of the issue, and there's things to say for either answer, and eventually people start talking, and then it usually starts rolling without too much more, because they start arguing with each other, which is great. Not arguing, but answering back. Yeah.
Having a scholarly discussion.
Yeah. And of course, the polling question is mandatory, which is another, a pollster would say, well, that changes everything too. You're forcing people to answer even if they don't really care. They might be answering randomly just to get it done. And I don't know. We need that nice pollster from TVO to come and advise us on how to do this better.
Another question I have, because we've talked about this beforehand, was you have an essay later on in the course where the students have to look for resources and look for papers to write their essay. Do you think them having that opportunity to read some articles beforehand has a positive effect on the overall performance on the essay and how they do in terms of finding their own resources for their essay topics?
Yeah, I definitely do. They get to go through at least 2 of these special topics articles before they start their essay, and they do the IT assignment, so they learn how to use things like Web of Science and decide whether an article is relevant or not. And so I think it's all part of a package that helps. They do a good job on the essay. Every year I'm pleasantly, not surprised, I'm just confirmed that they actually do quite well on that assignment, and very little plagiarism. They're quite competent at doing that. So.
Going to kind of follow up on that question about resources and getting the IT there. Just curious, something that I sort of noticed over the ages here. Students don't go to the library to look up a book anymore.
True.
And oftentimes they'll get, gosh, I got all these great resources, stuff like that, but they never actually find the book in the library that actually summarized all those papers and did a very good job of it and got to the essence of it there. So I was wondering, do you include that, or would you include that as part of, as part of the IT thing there? Make sure you physically go to the library and find a book.
That would be a good idea. I currently focus it on primary literature,
Right.
Journal articles, partly because that's easier to put limits around it. I don't want them using websites. There's lots of good information on various government agency websites, for example, but it's not refereed. There's no real quality controls, so I put that off limits. Maybe I should insist that they find at least one book that deals with the topic and use that as
Google,
well.
they figure it doesn't exist, right?
So true.
But you really can't Google the books on the shelf there to find out, hey, there's a great chapter on nitrates.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be a really good addition. I could make that part of their essay conditions. It's a little, makes it harder for me though, because I have a number of different essay topics so that I'm not marking 90 papers all on the same question. So I'd have to make sure each question actually has a useful book source. And I try to choose the questions to be topical, so there isn't always a recent book but that's a good idea.
Now I have two more mundane questions here. One, how much, on your first outline there, you had what the percentage of each thing, I think it was 10% was left over for the quizzes. You didn't actually call out how much you were making the quizzes worth, I thought. Maybe I missed it. And then you said 4 quizzes that at 5% each or something, so that would make 20%. So I was just wondering how much you were putting on.
We're getting there.
There it is. It went fast.
Oh, whoa.
So you don't actually call out the quizzes there. So that's 10% left over?
So it's 20% for quizzes and 25 for the essay plus 5 for the IT assignment makes 50, no,
110.
30. Oh dear, you've caught me out. I think, what's wrong here? I just give them a bonus 10%.
What a guy.
It's great for the teaching evaluations. Oh, what is wrong here?
So, but do you want to be 10% of the overall? Is that what you were shooting for? 10% would be these quizzes?
You know what? It's 4 at 2.5% each.
Okay, all right. So 10%, okay.
Mhm.
And then the other question that you're talking about is, I always think about this is, you never know what's on the other side of the computer, right? So are they doing it as a group, and they're writing down the stuff as a group? So that's why you can't put too much on it.
Right.
Is there a way within Learn that you can change the order of how many different versions of the same quiz? Or do you ever have a bank of things where some people get only 4 out of the 10 questions, that it's always kind of being randomized a little bit there? I know that makes it a little bit tougher to say you're comparing apples and apples, but
Right.
I was just, in terms of sort of security and things like that, I was wondering if there's anything being done like that.
That's probably a good idea. I guess I've consoled myself that it's only 10%, and that if they don't actually do it for themselves, they're going to pay a price because it is actually testable material. And so they will pay a price in preparedness when it comes to the tests. So for that reason, I haven't worried about it. And I've left it to them to
Yeah, so you have
decide.
an extra, some people might get by, but you'll catch them later in terms of have they done the work or not.
The only thing I do is not let anybody know whether they've got the right answers or not.
Right, that shouldn't be done until the end, right?
Yeah. So if they're collaborating and sharing, they don't know if they're getting the right answer or not. But no, that's right. That would be a facility that I could introduce in Learn, I should think. And
Okay. Is there a
It
way?
is technically possible, yes.
Okay. Technically possible and easy?
And easy.
Okay.
so you could just have a larger bank of questions and they'd be spun out a little differently for each user who comes on. Mm-hmm. Sounds reasonable.
Mary, do we have any questions from the World Wide Web?
No.
No? Oh, well.
Sorry.
The lines are iced over.
That's right.
They did get dropped halfway, but they came back, so I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Oh, dear.
Yeah.
It's one of those days. So are there any more questions? We get to go home early today because of Stephen not being here. Anyway, well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out, and we will continue to do our Learn user groups at the end of the winter term and the fall term. So we'll be doing this again towards the end of, well, usually early December, that first week after class is finished. Oh, we've got another question.
Is it possible to reschedule that other session earlier than the date you said?
Yes, Stephen did say he would come and do it for us in the next user learn group, but another, maybe what I would ask him to do is maybe come to our blended learning community group, which I can, it might be a good topic for that. So we can talk about that, maybe get it scheduled a bit earlier. Yep. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks, Ralph.
Thanks.